the dim glow of fame and fortune. Some legends are immortal, not because of their music, but because of the darkness that clings to them long after their last note fades. Tonight, we dive into a chilling tale that blurs the line between celebrity and the supernatural, a story whispered among the streets of London, lozenges, and echoing through empty arenas, a story known to few as the Rockstar of Death. Brace yourself as we journey into a world where music, obsession, and death collide, and where the shadows of the past reach far beyond the stage. Julian Mercer's rise to prominence began in the misty streets and rain-soaked alleyways of Manchester, where his extraordinary talent first began to draw attention. By the age of 12, he could replicate entire compositions after hearing them just once, and his guitar playing had already surpassed anything his teachers had encountered. Locals whispered about the boy whose music seemed to stir the very air around him, whose melodies could leave listeners unnerved yet captivated. His parents, practical and cautious, encouraged him to pursue more conventional activities, hoping to temper his obsessive focus. Yet Julian was unrelenting, drawn to music with a singular intensity, as if it were the only language in which he could truly exist. By his mid-teens, strange rumors began to swirl. Neighbors reported glimpses of Julian wandering the graveyard behind his home late at night, fingers moving over his guitar strings as if conjuring something unseen. Some swore the fog seemed to thicken around him, and that shadows clung unnaturally to his form. Even when the sun shone warmly over the town, a chill seemed to follow him, brushing the skin of those who walked nearby. Julian dismissed these murmurs with a shy, half-amused smile. Yet those closest to him sensed that there was a force in his music that was unlike anything else, powerful, magnetic, and frighteningly alive. In 1973, Julian formed his first band, Silent Requiem, assembling a small group of musicians who were equally passionate and ambitious. From the outset, their sound was different. Rather than the standard rock or folk compositions dominating the local scene, their music was dark, haunting, and layered with complexity. Julian's guitar solos were mesmerizing, often extending far beyond conventional scales, producing tones and harmonics that seemed to vibrate with a life of their own. Critics described his playing as almost supernatural, and fans quickly developed an almost obsessive devotion to the group's performances. Those who saw Silent Requiem live often reported a strange, almost hypnotic atmosphere, as if the music were not just heard, but felt deep within the body and soul. As the band began performing in clubs and small venues across northern England, strange occurrences followed them. Venues reported unexplainable incidents. Microphones would emit static at random. Lights would flicker or dim, and objects would move without contact. Band members themselves began to experience odd sensations, chills that had no source, fleeting shadows in empty rooms, and the occasional whisper that seemed to echo from nowhere. One night, in a rehearsal room in Leeds, Julian's guitar began to play a melody on its own while his bandmates watched in stunned silence. The notes were complex, precise, and utterly unfamiliar. Julian remained still, eyes unfocused, as if he were channeling something beyond his own awareness. Despite or perhaps because of these incidents, Silent Requiem's reputation grew. Fans described their concerts as transcendent experiences, a strange mix of beauty and fear that left them both exhilarated and unsettled. It became clear that Julian's music carried an intensity far beyond technical skill. There was something in it that reached into the deepest recesses of emotion, touching on both longing and despair, life and death. It was not merely entertainment. It was a force, an experience, an encounter with something larger than the self. By 1975, the band's underground success had translated into national recognition. Record labels began to take notice, and their first album was met with critical acclaim for its originality and haunting power. Music journalists struggled to describe Julian's talent adequately, resorting to phrases like uncanny, otherworldly, and beyond human comprehension. Fans were drawn to more than just the sound. They were captivated by the aura surrounding Julian Mercer himself. He seemed in ways subtle, yet undeniable, to exist apart from ordinary life. his presence commanding attention both on and off the stage. Even as fame beckoned, Julian remained intensely private. He avoided unnecessary publicity, preferring the solitude of practice and composition. Yet the stories of his peculiar habits only fueled the mythos surrounding him. Late-night walks in fog-laden streets, private sessions in empty churches, and his reported affinity for graveyards added a layer of mystique that fascinated fans and unsettled those who encountered him closely. Some speculated that the source of his genius was not merely natural talent, but a connection to something hidden, something powerful, and possibly dangerous. By the time Silent Requiem toured the United Kingdom in the late 1970s, Julian Mercer had already become more than a musician. He was a phenomenon. His rise was not measured merely in record sales or concert attendance, but in the sheer intensity of his presence, in the way his music seemed to move, the air, the shadows, and even the emotions of those who listened. From a small boy in a rain-soaked town to the enigmatic figure at the heart of a band that defied convention, Julian's journey was marked by talent, obsession, and an unmistakable hint of the supernatural. In the end, Julian Mercer's rise was never just about fame or skill. It was about a force within him that could not be contained, a connection to music that transcended ordinary experience. Even as the world took notice of Silent Requiem, those who truly understood him sensed that he was something more than a prodigy. He was a conduit, a vessel for a power that pulsed through his fingers and reverberated in the hearts of everyone who heard him. It was a rise that would not only define his life, but leave a legacy that continued to haunt the world long after his first chords rang out. Silent Requiem's rise to fame had always carried an edge of the uncanny, but by the time they were touring across England, the first signs of something far stranger than youthful superstition began to manifest. The incident was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence, exhaustion, or the overstimulation of life on the road. Yet, those who spent the longest hours with Julian Mercer knew there was more at work than mere coincidence. The band rehearsals, once vibrant and lively, began to feel charged with an intangible energy. Instruments would hum on their own after hours, and sheet music, left meticulously arranged, was sometimes found scattered or marked with strange symbols by the next morning. In Leeds, the keyboardist reported seeing a shadow detach itself from Julian during a late-night practice, stretching across the walls and floor in a manner no natural light could produce. It flickered with the rhythm of the music, responding to each note as though it were alive. At first, he hesitated to mention it, fearing disbelief or ridicule. But the sense of unease grew. By the time they reached Sheffield, the phenomena escalated into undeniable strangeness. One night, after an exhausting day of sound checks and interviews, the band stayed late to rehearse a new song. The drummer, exhausted and distracted, noticed Julian lift his guitar without prompting. The notes that followed were unfamiliar, hauntingly beautiful, yet tinged with an emotion that unsettled him deeply. The air grew cold, icy fingers tracing down his spine, and he could swear that the sound itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Julian's expression remained blank, almost trance-like, as if he were no longer himself, but a vessel for something beyond comprehension. His bandmates exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. No one spoke during the session, the only sound being the unearthly harmonics emanating from Julian's guitar. When he finally set the instrument down, the room fell into a silence so profound it seemed to thrum in their ears. No one could explain the feeling of oppressive presence that lingered long after the music ended. As Silent Requiem's fame expanded, so too did the strangeness that surrounded them. In Birmingham, the sound crew discovered that recording equipment had captured faint whispers layered beneath the band's tracks, whispers that did not match any of the lyrics or background vocals. When analyzed, the voices seemed to respond to the music, forming patterns that mirrored Julian's chord progressions. The producers involved reported feeling watched during playback, and more than one claimed to hear subtle laughter echoing from empty corners of the studio. Backstage at venues, incidents escalated further. Lights would flare and explode mid-performance, plunging the crowd into darkness, while Julian continued to play as if oblivious. Microphones occasionally transmitted nothing but distorted static. Yet Julian's solos carried on, hauntingly pure, resonating across the hall as though amplified by unseen forces. Crew members reported objects moving inexplicably, guitar picks sliding across tables, sheet music flipping pages on its own, and chairs rocking even when the room was empty. These events, while largely hidden from the fans, contributed to a growing aura of mystique and dread that surrounded the band. Fans who attended the shows often described experiences that bordered on the mystical. Some recounted seeing shapes in the corner of their vision that vanished when looked at directly. Others felt sudden chills sweep through the audience, synchronized with the crescendos of Julian's music. More than one fan claimed to have entered the concert hall feeling anxious or weary, only to leave hours later overwhelmed with emotion, as if the music had touched some hidden nerve within the soul. Accounts circulated of faint whispers carried on the wind as attendees left the venue, whispering words in languages no one could recognize, yet somehow understood. Even within the band, the effects were becoming tangible. Musicians reported vivid dreams after rehearsal night streams of dark corridors, shadowed figures, and melodies that refused to exist outside of sleep. Julian himself admitted to feeling a presence guiding him, shaping his music in ways he could not always control. It was not malevolent in a clear sense, yet it was impossible to ignore. His hands would sometimes move involuntarily across the strings, producing notes that seemed preordained, as if the music existed independently of his own mind. By 1976, the whispers of the unusual had spread beyond the band. Journalists and insiders began describing silent requiem concerts as experiences bordering on the supernatural. Some spoke of a palpable force in the air, others of lights dimming and flickering in rhythm with the music, even when all power sources were secure. Those who attended multiple shows reported feelings of obsession, a compulsion to hear Julian's music again and again, as though it had woven itself into the fabric of their consciousness. Despite or perhaps because of the growing unease, Silent Requiem's popularity soared. Their albums topped underground charts, and devoted followers began forming unofficial fan groups that treated Julian's work almost like a sacred ritual. The first signs of the otherworldly influence surrounding him had become undeniable. Shadows that moved independently, whispers that existed beneath the music, and an aura of cold, electric presence that could be felt by anyone near him. These early phenomena marked the beginning of something far larger, a force that would define the band, and Julian Mercer himself, for years to come. Yet even with all the fear and fascination, Julian carried on, seemingly indifferent to the disturbances around him. For him, the music was not simply sound, it was a conduit, a medium for something beyond ordinary perception. And as the first signs of the supernatural became undeniable, it was clear that Silent Requiem's journey was no longer just a rise to fame. It had become a descent into a realm where music, emotion, and something unearthly intertwined, leaving those who experienced it forever changed. The world was only beginning to glimpse the power Julian Mercer wielded, and the whispers and shadows were merely the opening chords of a story that would grow ever darker and more profound. The night of the Whiskey Echo Club performance in Los Angeles is still remembered as one of the most haunting evenings in rock history. The city's lights glimmered far below, oblivious to the storm of sound and energy building inside the small, packed venue. Fans had come from all corners of the city, drawn by rumors of Julian Mercer's otherworldly talent, eager to witness Silent Requiem live. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, a mix of excitement and a subtle, unplaceable tension, as if something beyond ordinary performance waited just out of sight. The concert began as expected, with Julian stepping onto the stage, his black coat catching the dim spotlight, eyes focused, fingers poised on the guitar strings. The opening notes of their first song sent shivers through the crowd. Julian's music was already more than sound, it was a presence, a force that seemed to vibrate through the bones of everyone in the room. The band played flawlessly, yet the air felt charged, electric, almost unnatural. Fans whispered about shadows shifting in the corners of the room, about reflections that didn't match the performers' movements. None of it was disturbing enough to pull them out of the moment. In fact, it only drew them further in. Midway through the set, Julian launched into a guitar solo that had never been rehearsed, notes cascading with precision that seemed impossible for a human hand. The audience gasped as the music took on a life of its own. Witnesses later described the sound as icy and beautiful, haunting yet captivating, the kind of melody that burrows under the skin and refuses to leave. Then came the first sign that something had gone terribly wrong. Julian's movements slowed. His fingers trembled over the strings, then froze. The guitar continued to play, seemingly guided by an unseen force. The melody twisted, elongated, each note vibrating with a spectral intensity that made the air thick and cold. Panic began to ripple across the stage and into the crowd. Bandmates rushed toward him, but when they reached Julian, he was already slumped over, eyes open yet unseeing. The audience fell silent, the music lingering in the space like smoke, almost reluctant to leave. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was clear to everyone present that nothing could be done. At 23, Julian Mercer was gone. The official report cited a sudden heart attack, but the circumstances felt surreal, almost impossible. Those who were closest to him insisted he had always been in peak health, a prodigy whose energy seemed limitless. Even after Julian's collapse, the music lingered. Fans swore they could hear the guitar continuing to play, soft but unmistakable, echoing the last solo he had performed. Some described seeing his shadow on stage, stretched unnaturally, towering above the instruments and equipment. The figure seemed almost alive, moving independently, casting darkness across the faces of the audience. A few people claimed they saw him lift his head, gaze sweeping the room, and then vanish into the ether, leaving an emptiness that felt tangible, oppressive. The phenomenon was subtle, fleeting, yet unforgettable, like a glimpse of something beyond life itself. Outside the venue, the streets of Los Angeles seemed unchanged, bright and oblivious, but the people who had been inside carried an eerie sense of lingering presence. Fans reported the feeling of being watched, a sensation that persisted long after they had left the club. Some even claimed to hear Julian's music faintly, echoing through alleyways and apartment windows, a ghostly refrain that refused to fade. Others spoke of dreams where Julian played for them alone, melodies that imprinted themselves so deeply that waking felt like a betrayal, leaving them haunted for weeks. Journalists covering the event struggled to convey what had occurred. Words like tragic and shocking felt inadequate. Reports focused on the suddenness of Julian's death, the stunned audience, and the unprecedented talent lost too soon. Yet interviews with eyewitnesses told a darker story, one that hinted at something supernatural. One roadie spoke of feeling a chill sweep over him, a cold that seemed to radiate from Julian's still body, and hearing a whisper behind his ear that said, "The music never stops." Musicians who had played alongside Julian remarked that there was a force in his performance they had never witnessed before, a presence that seemed to exist separately from him yet operated through him. In the days following the tragedy, rumors began circulating about the Whiskey Echo Club itself. Patrons reported unexplained flickering lights, chairs rocking on their own, and faint, distorted guitar notes that drifted from empty corners. Some fans claimed to see fleeting shadows on stage, tall and elongated, moving in rhythm with the music no one was playing. Others spoke of hearing whispers in the crowd, words they couldn't understand, yet they felt as though Julian was speaking directly to them from beyond the stage. Silent Requiem was forced to cancel the remainder of the world tour. Bandmates retreated into seclusion, struggling to reconcile the loss of their leader with the lingering presence he seemed to have left behind. For decades, fans would recount the night as a turning point in rock history, a moment when music and mortality collided, leaving an imprint that refused to fade. Julian Mercer's death was more than the loss of a prodigy, was the first public glimpse of a force beyond comprehension, a reminder that his connection to music had always been something more than human. To this day, the Whiskey Echo Club is remembered not just as a venue, but as a site of profound and unsettling significance. Those who were present on that night continue to tell stories of Julian's final performance. of shadows that danced independently, of melodies that played themselves, and of a presence that refused to leave. His death became legend, not only for its tragedy, but for the undeniable sense that, even in passing, Julian Mercer's music had transcended the ordinary, leaving a spectral resonance that haunts Los Angeles to this day. The Los Angeles tragedy marked the end of Julian Mercer's mortal life, but the beginning of his enduring legacy. The music he created, and the eerie phenomena surrounding it, ensured that his presence would linger in the minds of those who experienced it. A chilling reminder that genius sometimes carries with it a force beyond explanation, and that even in death, Julian Mercer's voice refused to be silenced. In the months following Julian Mercer's death, the legend of his presence began to spread beyond whispers and rumors, growing into something tangible, something that defied explanation. Stories surfaced of a shadowy figure roaming streets and venues, guitar slung casually across his back, hair wild and untamed, eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Witnesses swore that even in his ghostly form, Julian's aura commanded attention, magnetic, unnerving, almost predatory. He appeared not only in familiar haunts like London, Manchester, and Los Angeles, but in places that had never hosted him in life. Wherever music pulsed, Julian's presence seemed to follow. One of the most notorious accounts occurred in 1980 in Liverpool. A young, struggling band had booked a late-night session at a small studio, hoping to capture some spark of inspiration. They were tired, restless, and more than a little skeptical of the strange rumors circulating about Silent Requiem and their enigmatic frontman. As the night dragged on, a chill crept through the room, inexplicable in its suddenness. The lights dimmed without warning, and at the far end of the studio, a shadow materialized. At first, they laughed nervously, assuming it was a friend or rival playing a prank. But when the figure lifted a guitar and began to play, laughter died in their throats. The music that flowed was haunting, impossibly intricate, and disturbingly alive. Each note seemed to reverberate in the air as though it carried a presence, a consciousness. The room turned icy. Breath fogged before their eyes, and the mirrors lining the walls betrayed impossible distortions. Their own reflections twisted and warped, replaced at fleeting moments by the unmistakable visage of Julian Mercer. Pale, focused, almost smiling. Time felt unmoored. The young musicians couldn't tell if seconds or minutes passed as the ghostly solo unfolded. And then, as abruptly as it began, the room returned to normal. The shadow had vanished. On the studio floor lay a guitar, strings worn into intricate patterns that no human hands could replicate. The band fled, shaken and silent, yet forever changed by the encounter. Soon, reports of Julian's ghost began to proliferate across the globe. Fans attending concerts described chilling sensations, as though the air itself vibrated with his presence. Some swore they glimpsed him standing in the shadows of the stage, strumming chords impossible for the living to play. Recording studios reported instruments activating without contact, playing melodies Julian had composed but never completed. Sheets of music were discovered with ghostly annotations, cryptic phrases, chord progressions, and lyrics etched seemingly by an invisible hand, urging musicians to continue his work. The phenomenon did not discriminate between professional and amateur musicians. A young guitarist in Manchester awoke one morning to find a hauntingly precise arrangement scribbled across his notebook, a song he had never seen before. When he played it, the notes carried the same icy resonance that had defined Julian's live performances. Fans who attempted to emulate Silent Requiem's style reported sudden, uncontrollable skill surges, as if the ghost itself imbued them with temporary virtuosity. Yet the gift was accompanied by a cost many described dreams of dark hallways, shadowed figures, and whispers urging them toward perfection with an unsettling insistence. The moniker Rockstar of Death became popular among those who experienced the phenomenon firsthand. Julian's presence was no longer confined to specific locations. It seemed to ripple outward, attaching to music itself. Stories emerged of late-night rehearsals, interrupted by sudden cold drafts and fleeting apparitions. Instruments would move, chords would vibrate without touch, and every so often, a solitary note would hang in the air long after it was played. Some fans reported waking to find records spinning by themselves, spinning until the melodies ended, looping endlessly with a haunting precision that suggested intent. Even crew members, those who had worked with Julian in life, began to report encounters that bordered on the surreal. A longtime sound engineer recalled a moment in a London studio when the lights flickered violently and the mixer knobs twisted as though guided by an invisible hand. From the shadows, a faint figure strummed a guitar solo that resonated deep within the walls, leaving the engineer with an unshakable sense that he had been in the presence of something beyond comprehension. He fled the studio that night, unable to return for months, haunted not by fear alone, but by awe at the force he had witnessed. Across the world, fans swore they were not merely observers, but participants in a spectral phenomenon. Instruments played themselves, melodies composed by Julian long before death echoed in empty rooms, and sheet music bore annotations impossible for the living. Some claimed to see him hovering near speakers during late-night listening sessions. A figure no more solid than smoke, yet undeniably present. Those who resisted the compulsion to play his unfinished works found themselves plagued by obsessive thoughts, dreams filled with chords and riffs that demanded completion. The legend of Julian Mercer's ghost grew until it became impossible to ignore. Newspapers occasionally published strange, unexplained accounts, yet most dismissed them as urban myth or fan exaggeration. Still, first-hand testimony was overwhelming. Musicians, fans, and crew members described experiences too vivid, too consistent, and too detailed to ignore. Julian had transcended mortality, not as a mere memory, but as an active, haunting force that attached itself to music, to passion, and to anyone receptive to his resonance. By the mid-1980s, the Rockstar of Death was a global phenomenon. Tales of his ghostly appearances, spectral performances, and haunting influence spread like wildfire. Julian Mercer had become something far greater than a man, a presence woven into the very fabric of the music he had created, reaching beyond life to touch those who dared to listen. He existed in echoes, in shadows, in instruments that played themselves, and in the minds of those who felt the tug of genius mingled with something unearthly. The Ghost Emerges was no longer just a chapter in rock history. It had become an ongoing legend, from Liverpool studios to Manhattan basements, from sold-out arenas to solitary bedrooms. Julian Mercer's presence persisted, reminding the world that some music refuses to die. His melodies, his spirit, and his otherworldly command of sound continued to inspire, terrify, and haunt, leaving a trail of awe and unease that ensured the Rockstar of Death would never truly be gone. By the 2010s, the legend of Julian Mercer, the Rockstar of Death, had crossed oceans and time zones, transforming from local myth into an international phenomenon. Reports of his spectral presence emerged in cities as far-flung as New York, Tokyo, Berlin, and Rio de Janeiro, each account bearing the same unsettling traits. A shadowy figure, guitar in hand, eyes faintly glowing, interacting with music in ways impossible for any living human. Musicians, sound engineers, and fans alike began reporting encounters that could not be explained by trickery, coincidence, or imagination. In Tokyo, a young guitarist working late in a dimly lit studio experienced what he later described as both terrifying and awe-inspiring. As he strummed through scales, he felt an invisible presence hovering nearby. Suddenly, the strings beneath his fingers plucked themselves, producing chords he recognized instantly from Silent Requiem's first album, a sequence he had never mastered and could not have played alone. The sound carried a vibrancy, a resonance, as if the notes were infused with life. His fingers trembled, his heart raced, but he dared not resist. By the time the session ended, the chords had imprinted themselves on his memory in a way that would haunt him forever. Across the globe in New York, a midnight recording session took a similarly eerie turn. A studio assistant, reviewing footage from security cameras, noticed a shadowy figure lingering in a corner of the room. What was chilling was that the room had been empty, except for the assistant. and no one else had been present during the session. The figure remained motionless for minutes, then vanished without a trace. When the assistant played back the audio, faint guitar riffs could be heard layered beneath the tracks, a melody unmistakably Julian's, flowing as if performed by a living hand. The assistant's colleagues laughed at first, attributing it to a technical glitch. But over time, more reports accumulated, and skepticism gave way to unease. Berlin became another epicenter for encounters. Local musicians began leaving instruments tuned to specific notes, believing that Julian's spirit would respond to certain frequencies. Guitar strings, piano keys, even digital synths seemed to play themselves under his influence. One jazz bassist recounted a session where a piece he had struggled to complete suddenly flowed naturally, as though guided by an unseen mentor. Notes appeared in the sheet music that he could not have written, chords materializing as ghostly suggestions. Witnesses described the feeling as a presence both gentle and commanding. Julian's genius transmitted across time and space. Fans, too, became active participants in what many began to call the Julian phenomenon. Some left guitars leaning against walls, tuned precisely, hoping for a ghostly response. Others reported strange messages appearing on windows and mirrors, condensation forming into legible words. Play it, finish it, before it's too late. These messages were often fleeting, vanishing as quickly as they appeared, yet they left an indelible impression. Many who encountered them spoke of a compulsion, a sense of urgency, as though Julian's spirit needed them to act, to continue his unfinished work. Paranormal experts attempted to rationalize the phenomenon, though few could offer complete explanations. Some proposed that Julian had become a conduit between life and death, a being caught in liminality, neither fully alive nor fully gone. Unlike traditional hauntings, which tether spirits to places, Julian's influence traveled with music itself. The distinction between genius and ghost blurred, leaving observers uncertain whether they were witnessing a natural prodigy or a supernatural entity. Reports continued to multiply. In Rio de Janeiro, a street guitarist practicing at dawn claimed that a spectral hand plucked his strings, leading him through an intricate solo that left him breathless and disoriented. In London, a retired sound engineer described seeing a shadow cross the control room during a live broadcast, and shortly after, the audio equipment began playing faint, ethereal melodies, impossible compositions that seemed to bend the laws of acoustics. Musicians who encountered these incidents shared similar sensations: a cold, electric presence that could be felt pressing against the chest, a faint vibration in the air, and the unmistakable aura of Julian Mercer's unearthly talent. The global nature of these sightings suggested a shift in Julian's influence. He was no longer bound by geography, yet there remained consistency in the reports: glowing eyes, shadowed form, the unmistakable skill with instruments, and the chilling ability to communicate through music itself. Some researchers speculated that Julian's spirit had fused with his recordings, instruments, and compositions, creating a network of spectral resonance that allowed him to manifest wherever his music played. Others suggested that he had transcended human limitations, achieving a kind of immortality through sound, becoming both myth and medium. Musicians began reporting collaborative experiences with the ghost, describing improvisations that felt guided by a sentient force. Fans noted that unfinished songs, demos, and sheet music seemed to demand attention, often yielding harmonies and riffs beyond ordinary comprehension. Some claimed that attempting these compositions without reverence led to nightmares, unexplained injuries, or hallucinations, reinforcing the idea that Julian's presence was not merely playful but exacting, even dangerous. By the mid-2010s, Julian Mercer's legend had become fully global. From underground jazz bars to high-end studios, from basements in Tokyo to lofts in Berlin, people continued to report encounters with the Rockstar of Death. His influence, while invisible, was undeniable. Instruments tuned to precise notes would play themselves. Chords long forgotten or unfinished echoed in empty rooms, and messages appeared, ephemeral but insistent, urging the living to complete what he had begun. Julian's spirit had evolved from haunting a single city to haunting the music itself, a presence that transcended life, death, and even geography. In essence, Julian Mercer no longer existed merely as a memory or a myth. He had become a living echo in the world of sound, a force that responded to those bold enough to engage with his genius. Every string plucked by unseen hands, every ghostly chord that resonated through a quiet studio, every fleeting message on a fogged window served as a reminder. Julian Mercer, the rock star of death, had become eternal. His music, his presence, and his spectral genius had spread across the globe, ensuring that those who listened, played, or even dared to imagine would forever feel the haunting power of a spirit that refused to be silenced. Decades after Julian Mercer's untimely death, the legend of the Rockstar of Death has only grown, stretching beyond borders, generations, and even the limits of the natural world. Musicians, fans, and paranormal enthusiasts continue to share stories of encounters that are as chilling as they are inexplicable. Reports are no longer confined to a single city or studio. They now arrive from every corner of the globe. From dimly lit rehearsal spaces in New York to empty clubs in Tokyo, people swear they have felt Julian's presence, sometimes as a fleeting shadow, sometimes as a chilling, palpable force that bends the very air around them. Among musicians, the encounters are often the most intense. Some have vanished entirely after claiming to feel his ghostly influence, leaving instruments behind that continue to play themselves for hours, days, or even weeks. A young guitarist in Berlin reportedly woke to find her strings strumming in the middle of the night, playing a composition she had never written. Yet unmistakably, Julian's. In Los Angeles, a drummer fled a studio after feeling an icy grip around his wrists as unseen hands guided him through rhythms no human could replicate. These stories, while terrifying, have also cemented Julian's reputation as more than a spirit. He is a force, a presence that interacts with music itself. Videos, photographs, and audio recordings occasionally capture fragments of the phenomenon. Shadowy figures appear in corners, spectral outlines that vanish when approached. Audio equipment records melodies that cannot be traced to any musician. And faint whispers fill empty rooms with fragments of lyrics, half-completed riffs, or cryptic instructions. In some cases, entire songs appear overnight on sheets of music, scrawled in handwriting that seems to float above the paper, fading if anyone attempts to touch it. Fans and musicians alike have learned that Julian's influence is selective. It rewards those willing to engage with his unfinished works, and punishes those who approach out of envy, arrogance, or disrespect. Old venues where silent requiem performed have become pilgrimage sites for fans daring to experience the supernatural firsthand. In Manchester, the now abandoned Whiskey Echo Club is said to resonate with faint echoes of Julian's guitar late at night, notes weaving through dusty chairs and shattered mirrors. Visitors report chills, the sensation of being observed, and whispers that seem to come from the very walls. Some hear melodies from his unfinished songs lingering in the shadows, urging them to listen, to play, or to complete what was left behind. Even decades later, the air in these spaces carries a tension, a presence, as though Julian never truly left. Paranormal experts have attempted to explain his enduring influence, yet Julian defies traditional categories of haunting. Unlike spirits tied to places, he appears wherever music exists, responding to instruments, notes, and human creativity. He is not merely a ghost. He is a conduit for obsession, genius, and unresolved tragedy. Those who encounter him describe a sense of both awe and dread. Some feel compelled to play, as if invisible strings guide their hands. Others experience terror so profound it drives them from the room entirely. His presence is magnetic and dangerous, inspiring brilliance in one musician while leaving another shaken or broken. The legend has evolved into a global, cautionary tale. Some insist Julian waits for a musician worthy enough to complete his final, unfinished album, a collection said to contain melodies and arrangements that could change music forever if ever completed. Others claim he preys on envy and ambition, punishing those who seek fame or mastery without respect. striking through the power of sound itself. Accounts of midnight sessions interrupted by ghostly melodies or instruments strumming themselves abound, suggesting that his influence is not passive but deliberate, guided by an intelligence that remains connected to the music he loved and the life he lost. Fans who study his legacy carefully often speak of a dual nature. Julian Mercer is both inspiration and warning. His music, composed during life with unmatched intensity, continues in death to affect anyone who dares to reach for it. It is a gift, but also a danger, offering glimpses of brilliance while demanding reverence. Some musicians claim to feel a pressure when performing his pieces, as if he is listening, judging, or even teaching. Others describe vivid dreams, in which Julian appears, guitar in hand, playing melodies that defy conventional theory, guiding their hands while shadows twist around them, never allowing the moment of creation to be entirely free of unease. Even today, Julian Mercer's presence manifests subtly but unmistakably. Recordings played late at night carry faint static whispers, guitars left unattended sometimes strum themselves, and those who attempt his compositions report inexplicable visions of a shadowed figure, hair, wild eyes, glowing faintly, moving with a rhythm all its own. The music is alive, and the ghost is part of that life, bound to sound, chords, and human fascination. In essence, the Rockstar of Death refuses to rest. His legacy is not confined to history books or recordings. It lives in the very essence of music he created and continues to haunt. Wherever a guitar strings a chord, wherever melodies are strummed, Julian's shadow may follow unseen, yet undeniable. He waits in the resonance of each note, in the silence between chords, in the faint whisper of unfinished songs, challenging the daring, warning the envious, and ensuring that the spirit of his genius remains eternally bound to the living world. Julian Mercer's music, born of obsession, talent, and tragedy, has transcended mortality. His influence is immortal, a force that haunts, inspires, and terrifies. To encounter the Rockstar of Death today is to glimpse the blurred line between genius and the supernatural, between life and lingering presence. He is a reminder that some brilliance cannot be confined to the living, that music, obsession, and spirit can intertwine to create a force that refuses to be silenced. His shadow remains, waiting for the next note, the next musician daring enough to play, and the next soul willing to confront the eternal resonance of the Rockstar of Death. So next time you pick up a guitar, hear a faint melody in the night, or feel a chill in the air as music plays, remember the tale of Julian Mercer, the Rockstar of Death, a man who lived too loudly, died too young, and whose presence refuses to fade. His songs echo in empty halls, his shadow lingers in darkened rooms, and his legacy reminds us that some music is eternal, and some ghosts never rest. If you ever hear a guitar strumming by itself, or a whisper of an unfamiliar song, don't reach out. Listen, but beware. The Rockstar of Death may be near, and he is still playing for an audience that can never leave.